Hello everyone, you are watching or listening to the Grounded Apologetics for Teens Digging Deeper podcast, and this is episode number 2. In the very first episode, I went through some apologetics tips to kind of elaborate on my first 3 short videos that I made about apologetics, about the Columbo question and balancing grace and truth, and some things to kind of aid you in doing that. And in this episode, we're going to dive into some philosophy, which is going to be really fun. But first, if you are not familiar with my channel, I make these short videos to kind of explain apologetics and theological concepts in 5 minutes or less. And they're just kind of brief, to the point explanations to equip young people to defend Christianity, to share their faith with others, and have answers to some of the most common objections that people ask about Christianity, about the Bible, about the existence of God, and things like that. So in this episode, we're going to talk about philosophy, okay? So philosophy is one of my personal favorite divisions of apologetics. I just love philosophy. And most specifically, I love morality. So anything having to do with morality, good and evil, right? So I love to talk about the problem of evil and the solutions to the problem of evil, which are called theodicies. A theodicy is your attempt to resolve the problem of evil, right? And I love talking about how morality proves the existence of God. Objective morality demonstrates that there must be a divine creator, which I talked about in 3 of my short videos. I think episode 4, 5, and 6. I discussed morality, and I just love to talk about morality, right? So I did a 3-part series on it, as I just mentioned, and went through different theological and moral concepts, right? So the first one was the problem of evil, which was episode 4, and then why the existence of God is necessitated by objective morality, which was episode 5, and then episode 6, we went through how you can use a discussion of morality and of the problem of evil to launch into sharing the gospel, because it's just such a great starter, right? It's a really fantastic conversation starter to launch into the gospel. But I wanted to kind of elaborate on a couple things that I mentioned in those videos that I didn't really get to discuss in as much detail as I wanted to discuss. And there's a couple things that I kind of wanted to explain. And there's 2 in particular that I want to dive into. And one of those I'm going to talk about in this episode, and one of them I will talk about in the next episode. So make sure you check that one out too as soon as I get it out. But for this one, I wanted to talk a little bit about the problem of evil and free will. You may have noticed when I dealt with the problem of evil and offered some explanations to attempt to explain, why God would allow evil, I never used the free will argument. Okay, and you may be wondering that because the free will argument is like the most popular explanation for the problem of evil. It's like the cliche Christian answer. Why would God allow evil? Well, free will, That's kind of just the go-to answer, the go-to response that Christians give. Well, there's a very specific reason that I did not use the free will argument, and it's not because I don't believe in free will. I do believe in free will, in fact. I believe in it in a very particular sense. And you can disagree on that. That's just my opinion. There are some people who believe in free will or not, or they believe in it in a different sense than I might believe in it, but that doesn't really matter at this point. What really matters is that I don't think free will is adequate to respond to the problem of evil. And even if you're like not Calvinist at all, even if you strongly believe in free will, you can kind of see my point, because free will still isn't adequate, even if it does exist exactly in the sense that Armenians believe it does. I still don't think it's adequate. And there's a reason why I believe that I'm going to explain. But first I want to say that there are many other explanations to the problem of evil, and you can go back and check out episode 4 and see kind of how I responded to that. There's many more theodicies besides that. There's many more ways that you could respond, even in addition to the ones that I mentioned. But I still think that free will is inadequate, and there's so many other explanations that, one that isn't adequate, it's not even necessary to bring up. Since there's so many other good explanations that work perfectly well, you're not going to bring up one that's only halfway there and doesn't really solve the problem, right? So that's why I don't even bring up the free will argument, because there's so many other good explanations that work way better. So free will is a very, very common response, right? So if someone asks you, like, why would a loving God allow evil in the world? Why would he allow someone to sin and not choose Jesus and then go to hell? Why would he allow that? Since he is all-powerful, since he is all-knowing and morally good, why would he allow that? And the common Christian answer is, right? Just free will, Well, he gave humans a choice, and they get to choose that, and then that's on them. And I agree with that. I agree with that in a sense, but I still feel like it's not adequate. And here's the reason why. And I'll give you a very specific example to illustrate why. One of the most common objections to Christianity that I hear that has to do with the problem of evil is, why doesn't God just visibly appear to people? Then they would be saved, right? Why couldn't God just visibly appear, give everyone a really clear sign, say, this is me, you can believe in me, and then they can believe in him, and then they'll be saved? Why doesn't God do that? And, again, Christians most commonly use the free will argument to respond to that. They'll just say, well, that wouldn't be free will. How would it not be? God is he's not forcing them to believe in him, he's just appearing to them. Well, no, that's not free will, because when you see something very clearly in front of you, it's not a choice to believe, it's kind of forced on you. Well, is it? Because we see that in the New Testament, God actually did visibly appear to people, causing them to become saved. So is that a violation of free will, or is it not? And you still haven't answered the question of why God does do that in some circumstances, but not in others, right? So if we look at the story of Paul, Saul who became Paul, traveling to Damascus in Acts chapter 9, we see that, for a little bit of background, Saul was a Pharisee, he was a Jew, and he was persecuting the Christian church. So he was very, very zealous for the Jewish law. He was very, very religious, and he was persecuting anyone who was a follower of Christ. And he was throwing these people in jail, he was beating them, he was killing them. And so then he found out that a bunch of Christians had gone and hidden in Damascus, okay? So he gets permission from the Sanhedrin to go to Damascus and to persecute all these Christians, to locate them and to do horrible things to them. So then Saul goes and starts traveling to Damascus. And it's on the way to Damascus that Jesus visibly appeared to him, threw him off a horse, blinded him, and told him, without giving him any choice, he just told him, you are going to go into ministry and you are going to be my hands and feet to the Gentiles. Just very, very, very obvious. Okay? So it doesn't really seem like he was giving him much of a choice. Okay? So, and a lot of people would say, well, that's a violation of free will. Because if he did that these days, people say, why doesn't God just visibly appear to me and show me that he exists? Well, people would say, well, that's a violation of free will. So was Paul's experience a violation of free will? Was God violating his free will when he appeared to him and said, you're going to go into ministry? Because he wasn't really giving him much of a choice. Or was he? But either way, if you say that that is a violation of free will or if it isn't, free will is still inadequate. Because if that is a violation of free will, if God violated Paul's free will in that scenario and forced him to become saved and go into ministry, then why doesn't he do that in every scenario? But even if it wasn't a violation of free will, why doesn't God go that far in every single scenario? You still haven't answered the question, right? So free will isn't really adequate to explain because it's kind of circular. It's all going back to that, well, why doesn't God? Okay? And whenever you have the question of why doesn't God or why does God, you're never really going to get a perfect answer. Why? Because God's ways are so much higher than our ways. We can't really understand the mind of God. We can get bits and pieces. We can give a solution and offer a solution that might resolve the issue in our minds, but there's never really an exact, precise, all-inclusive, what am I getting at? There's never really a perfect answer to understanding God, right? So we can hint at it, but we can never get exactly there. So what I'm offering is just a bunch of different explanations to try to get there, to try to offer you some solutions. But again, we can never really understand the ways of God. So whenever we're asking, like, well, why does God do this or why doesn't God do this? We never really have a perfect answer. But in short, free will isn't adequate. You can disagree, or you cannot. You can disagree or you can agree. But that's the reason why I didn't bring it up, because I don't want to give a solution that I don't think is adequate. I want to give solutions that will help a little bit more, because I just think that free will is circular reasoning. I don't think it helps that much. There's another explanation that I wanted it to offer a little bit more that I heard this one time that I thought was really cool. And it's that if God didn't allow sin in the world, he wouldn't be allowing us the ability to build righteous traits such as self-control and forgiveness, mercy, grace, perseverance, things like that. So if you don't have anyone ever wronging you, then you can't show that person grace. You can't show that person mercy or forgiveness. So you'll never have the ability to grow those righteous traits, right? If there's no sin, then there's no ability to respond to sin like Jesus would. Okay, so by allowing evil in the world, God is actually allowing us the ability to grow righteous traits, to build those characteristics, and then to be rewarded for them in the next life, right? So when we practice those things as Christians, we're going to get to heaven and we're going to be rewarded for that, which is just completely gracious, and it's just so overwhelming to me to think about that we're going to be rewarded for that, even though we do not deserve it by any means. But it's so cool that God allowed us that opportunity, even though that means that there's going to be wrong, even though that means that there's going to be hurting and pain. We have the ability to be rewarded for responding to that in the right way, which is just really cool. And I thought that was a neat theodicy. But at the same time, it doesn't come close, because you're still asking the question of, why did God? It's only a little piece of the puzzle. The theodicy that I rely on the most is probably the fact that God is bringing the greatest good out of the greatest evil, right? So the absolute greatest good possible, I believe, is the glorification of God. And I think that's evident to all Christians. I would say all Christians, well, most Christians can kind of agree on that. The greatest possible good is the glorification of God, bringing God glory, worshiping him, not even human salvation. Because I think if the greatest good were human salvation, then everyone would be saved, right? No one would go to hell. But the fact that God is glorifying himself even through evil, even through wrong, that is the greatest possible good. So he is achieving the greatest possible good, right? So that is kind of my explanation for the problem of evil. One of the many ways to explain the problem of evil is that God is bringing the greatest possible good, right? So I think that all the different little explanations kind of give you little pieces to the puzzle, and they kind of point you in the right direction. But I don't think there's one that is just the exact answer, right? Because we can never get a perfect explanation when you're asking the question of why God again. But free will, I feel like, doesn't even help, because it's just inadequate. It's just circular. So that's the reason why I did not bring it up. All right, so with that, we wrap up this episode of the Digging Deeper podcast. And next time, I'm going to go a little deeper into the reason why God is a source of morality and how exactly he is a source of morality, because that's kind of ambiguous exactly what that means. And I hope to see you there. Thanks for watching.